No, not that. I tried to make.
What did you just do?
I tried to make it go to live.
Hello? Why is my video stopped? Anybody know?
Good evening, everybody. We'll be getting started in a moment. You all can hear me, I hope. Give me a thumbs up if you hear me. Oh, there you go. Excellent. We'll put up our chat. We have the chat box on the side. If anybody has any comments as we go along, we can, you can put something in the comments. Because we're going to try to mute everybody like this, we don't get interference. Okay. We'll just give another few seconds for people to join in here. Sorry that the Tuesday night class today, you're going to have to bring your own soup to enjoy the class. Okay, we're going to get started. This class is only going to be about 25 minutes. It's about a half hour. The class today, what we're going to talk about is called Positivity Bias. It is based on a new book that came out. It's actually written by the author of the book, Mendel Kalmanson. The book is Optimizing Turbulent, and it's meant to reframe our experiences during turbulent times. And the book is, that's what the class is today about, stories to reframe our experiences during these turbulent times. The book, its Positivity Bias, is based on the Rebbe's life and how the Rebbe lived a life of absolute positivity. It's a great book. Highly recommend it to read it. You can buy it on Amazon. It's a wonderful book. Today's class we're going to talk about, and every week for the next 3 to 4 weeks, we will have another one of these on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. And the lesson today we're going to talk about is optimizing the turbulent, transient, and transitional periods in life. And what we're going to do is take different stories of the Rebbe and look at them and learn what we can learn from them. They say a story about once a wealthy fellow was making a massive party for all his buddies and neighbors. And he also, a poolside party, and he also invited Max, the town schlemazel, to come to the party. And as he has this party in the backyard mansion, everybody's enjoying the wonderful food and drinks, and people were amazed by what was going on. At the height of the party, the host said, I have a 10-foot man eating a gator in my 10-foot man eating gator in the pool. And I'll give $1 million to anyone who dares to jump inside the pool and swim with the gator. The rich man barely finishes saying his bet, and all of a sudden they hear a splash in the pool, and of course Max the schlemazel is in the pool. And he's fighting for his life, fighting with the gator, eventually is able to strangle the gator, kill it, that the gator floats to the top, and he makes his way out of the pool. The host says, well, Max, you won the prize. $1 million is your reward. Max says, nah, I don't want $1 million. He says, $500,000 I'll give you. He says, no, a bet's a bet. I got to pay my deal. I got to pay my debt. He says, no. He says, come on, a new Porsche, something. He says, no, all I want to know is the name of the guy that pushed me in the pool. So when we talk about different things that happen in life, there are many different ways, that there are many different things that come to us. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, or that we ask ourselves, especially in these transitional, turbulent times, is how do we handle situations that disrupt our schedule? How do we deal with obstacles in our path? How about sudden illness or other emergencies that force us to put the whole life on hold? And even more so is when we have plans and we think that everything's going to be a certain way, and all of a sudden, boom, something out of that you never imagined, you never planned for, all of a sudden is stopped. What do we do? How do we go about it? All of a sudden, many of us become very disoriented when life takes an unexpected turn. We know we were supposed to be here at this time, supposed to do this at this time. We were supposed to spend that amount of money then. And all of a sudden, boom, everything throws into a whole whirlwind of mishaps of who knows what's going to happen. But what if we looked at every single situation and occurrence that happens to us from a whole different light? What if we realize, or what if we weren't necessarily in charge? What if there was something more going on into our lives than we're really aware of? And I think that one of the key ingredients to withstanding the ability to be able to go with the wind, so to speak, is to see and be able to realize and discover the hidden meaning and the opportunity within everything that we come across and how we deal with it. So here is an interesting perspective, not only interesting, but a helpful perspective to be able to give us an understanding to appreciate every circumstance and situation that we're in. In 1967, Mrs. Miriam Swerdlow attended a Chabad-sponsored convention in Detroit, Michigan. And at this convention, it's a women's convention, and the convention was over the weekend. Sunday night, they were all supposed to return to New York. This was in the winter, and of course, as they come to the airport, they find out there's this massive snowstorm, and because of that, their flight is canceled due to the snowstorm. Because of what happened, the group rushed to find out what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And the leader of the group, who was Mrs. Popak, called up the Rebbe's office to say that these women were now stuck in the airport in Detroit. Well, the secretary picks up the phone and tells them what the Rebbe passes on the message to the Rebbe that they said that the women are stuck in the airport in Detroit. And the Rebbe responded to the secretary to tell the women that the Rebbe doesn't know what the word stuck meant. What does it mean, stuck? So the women tried to explain stuck means that they can't go and the flight is, they can't take off, they can't go. So the Rebbe said, yes, he knows what the word stuck means, but in his lexicon, a Jew is never stuck. Upon learning of the Rebbe's experience, the Rebbe's response, the women quickly rose to the occasion, spread out throughout the whole airport, and of course made sure that every Jewish woman there would have Shabbos candles to light and so on. Mrs. Swerdloff concludes her story saying, the women and families all over the world, United States, started lighting Shabbos that Friday night because a group of women were quote unquote stuck in the airport in Detroit. In fact, there's an answer from the Rebbe that actually followed this, that the Rebbe asked, to his great amazement, these women were in a whole Shabbaton of inspiration and everything else, and then they come to the airport and they see a snowstorm and they're wondering that they're stuck. The snowstorm should have brought them to the greatest, make them rise to the occasion to say, look, there's snow, meaning what can we do because of this predicament? What can we learn from the situation? How can we realize and say, what can we go about it? That means even though this was an unintended consequence, even though this was a reason, this was not something they planned for, and they may have been upset at the very fact that they were there in the airport and they couldn't go and do where they wanted to be the next day. What the Rebbe was teaching them was that there's no such thing as being stuck. Wherever you are, you're supposed to be there, and there's a reason why you're there. And the art of living purposefully is finding the meaning and finding the reason of why you are in a specific time, in a specific situation for a specific reason. And realizing that you are there not because by happenstance, but there's a reason that you have to accomplish and there's something that you ought to be accomplishing. Now more than ever, many of us are feeling disillusioned. Why are we in this predicament? We feel unsettled by this new type of normal work-home environment, these routines that were isolated, quarantined. Many of our plans have been suspended, things we wanted to do all of a sudden we can't do. And probably the greatest challenge emotionally and physically is, where do we go from here? The equilibrium that we don't even know how long this is going to last for. When is it going to be taken away? When can we finally go outside? When can we finally go back to normal? Or what this new normal is ever going to look like? And the following story gives us an example of how we live in a situation where the unknown, like in between, not here or not there. And this story takes us to Rabbi Avram Glick, who for many years was the principal of the Yeshiva College in Melbourne, Australia. But as a young rabbinic student from Melbourne, he married a teacher who was in Worcester, Massachusetts. After their marriage, according to the Rebbe's instructions, they moved to Worcester, Massachusetts, where she was the teacher, and he got a job as organizing youth activities for the community. After a few years, a position opened in Melbourne for him to become the principal in charge of the Yeshiva College School, and he was invited to relocate with his family to Melbourne, Australia. He asked and received the Rebbe's blessings and approval and was planning now to move to Australia. However, as he began to prepare his move to Australia going back many years ago, it didn't just happen like this. It was a few months period until they got the visas, the moving, and everything else. And meanwhile, he was just like treading water in Worcester, because he was not in Worcester because he was eventually going to move to Australia, but he was not in Australia yet. So he was not here and not there. And he expressed his frustration to the Rebbe about his mindset, that he's not here or not there, and he's like not settled. And the Rebbe over here told him a very interesting thing and something very important, which we can really apply, especially to this time and day and age. And the Rebbe told him as follows. He says, if you look in the Torah, the Jewish people traveled 42 times throughout the desert of 40 years. Some places they were there for 30 years, some places they were there for 2 days, some places they were there for a week. When they came to a spot of where they had to stop, they had no clue at how long they're going to be there for. It was only once the cloud rested, they knew they were going to stay there. Once the cloud lifted, they knew they had to leave. Regardless of how long they were going to be there, they had to build the tabernacle. Now, to build a tabernacle wasn't just your pop-up tent. Building the tabernacle meant that you have talking about 3 million people had to settle where they were. Building the tabernacle entailed 120 type of different sockets, 60 different 100 different beams that had to be put up with the curtains and the vessels and the outside courtyard. Everything had to be set up to the extent that today, all the laws of Shabbos, we learned about the construction and deconstruction of the actual tabernacle. But what we see from over here is that even though it was only from a day that they may have to stay there, they had no clue how long they would have to stay there. The Levites did everything to be able to make the sanctuary as perfect as it can be to the best of their ability. What is the Rebbe was telling him is that this teaches us that every single one of our stations have to be significant. It doesn't make a difference how long we're going to be there for. Wherever we are at the moment, we have to live the moment to its fullest and make sure we're there 100%. Meaning that a person should never live through life as just standing with a packed suitcase. I can't do anything today because I have an appointment tomorrow. Many times we live in a situation because I have a flight in 2 days, my mind is so shaken I can't do anything for the next 2 days because I'm going to fly in 2 days. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, so I can't do anything today. What the Rebbe was telling this individual, this rabbi, was you have to realize that you live in the moment. Hashem allows us to be fully present where we are at the very moment, and that's the only way we can accomplish something, is when we are fully in what we're doing. The Rebbe provides us a perspective and a paradigm shift that can be potentially huge and a major ramifications. You cannot compare a mindset to when a person is focused on where they are or to when they're always waiting something's going to happen in the future. And what the Rebbe is telling us is just like the Jewish people in the time of the desert, when they were staying in one place for a day, they did whatever they have to do for that day. The same thing is also, we have to do everything we have to do for that time period, wherever we are living in that moment. That means that our emotional, mental, material, spiritual investment in any given situation and our relationship depends on whether we see it as something which is, okay, I'm waiting for it to pass, or I'm going to do whatever I can at this very moment. There's another interesting story, a side note. It also, the same thing happened when in 1970, when many people came to Crown Heights. At the time, it was 20 years of the Rebbe's leadership, and by the Farbrengen, there was a chartered plane and was going to leave Saturday night, and there was a Farbrengen Saturday night, and the Rebbe at the Farbrengen says, you have people sitting here, but what they're thinking about is about the flight, to make sure they make their flight. We can't live the moment present if we're always thinking about the future. What the Rebbe taught us was that in every moment, as temporary and as transient as it may be, we need to not look at it as something out of the way as it may seem, but we have to take the inner point and focus on it and see what we can do to make the best out of this situation. And if we, so to speak, lose that opportunity, we can miss the very reason of why we're in that situation. Now, it's one thing to apply divine providence into everything we do and to every moment in life and even transitional moments in life. But what about moments of crisis and challenge. The time that we spoke about the story of Rabbi Glick, it was just in between situations, but now we're seemingly in a time of crisis and a time of challenging, and a very challenging time. How are we to approach and deal with situations that bring grief, suffering, pain? How do we then deal with those transitions? There was a son of a chassid who was hospitalized just before the high holidays. And his son visited the Rebbe to receive lekach. Lekach was honey cake that the Rebbe would give out before Yom Kippur and before Hoshana Rabbah. And the son came to get lekach from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe looked at the son. Actually, the son's name is Rabbi Simon Jacobson. He's the one that said the story about when his father was hospitalized. And the Rebbe gave him a piece of cake. And the Rebbe said, give this to your father. And may God bless him with a sweet and healthy year. And then the Rebbe added, tell your father that when he finishes his mission for which he was sent to the hospital, God will then send him home. Inspired by the Rebbe's message, the young man who was in the hospital, the father who was in the hospital at the time, initiated conversations with doctors and patients and any person that he came across wherever he was, and inspired them. It was high holidays to tell them about the holiday or anything that it had to do with about Judaism. And later on, they found out that while he was in the hospital, how many people he then inspired about Judaic stuff and keeping them, just giving them a good impression about Judaism and so on and so forth. When you look at the story, you can imagine the chassid being in the hospital. He's asking, what brought me to the hospital in the first place? What's he doing here? Why is he here? But then the Rebbe comes along and says, 1 second. Just because you're in the hospital, it didn't change your mission that God gave you to do in this world. Wherever you are, even in the most difficult of times, God gave you a mission to accomplish. And there's a purpose for you being there. Looking for the purpose, doing the purpose that you're there, all of a sudden gives you a certain sense of solace, peace, tranquility, to realize that you're not just here because you're ill, you're here because you have a mission to accomplish. Most people in the chassid situation would have viewed being in the hospital due to a certain type of medical condition. And that's why they had to be there. The Rebbe gave him all of a sudden a whole new outlook and said, you're not in the hospital because you're ill. You're not in the hospital because since, yes, that happens to be some type of repercussion because of it. You're in the hospital because God said that you have a job to do in the hospital. And when you're done your job, you'll come home. It happens to be the only way you would get to the hospital to do the job is that God unfortunately had to make you ill. Should you be able to accomplish it otherwise, then you wouldn't have to be ill. In the Rebbe's worldview and in the concepts of Hasidism teaching us is that there are sparks of holiness in every single place, and wherever we go, we have to elevate them. And regardless of what our situation is, wherever it brings us and whatever it causes us, there's a certain spark that we have to do. Like the famous meme that was going around today, where the devil, so to speak, tells God, look, I closed down all the synagogues. And God says, no, I made every home a synagogue. It's the way we look at it than what we need to do. Every single home today is becoming a place of Torah study and of prayer. Of course, we want to get together, but we have to realize that while we are in our own homes, we have to be able to make it the best and utilize the mission of why we're there. Just to conclude with one last story, bringing home this concept of making the mission. In the late 1970s, it was the early years of Rabbi Yisrael and Vivi Deren's shlichus, where they were in Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut, and one of their children became very ill that caused them to be in the hospital for an extended amount of time. And between being one parent in the hospital with one of the children and one parent being with the other children at home, of course, this took a toll on their activities in the Chabad house, which they weren't able to, in their eyes, do much. And they would write a report to the Rebbe every month or every week of their activities of what they did. And that month, they wrote their report of their activities, and they wrote that due to their son's condition, they spent much time in the hospital or at home with the other children, and therefore, many projects fell to the wayside that they were not able to do. A time went by, and a short while later, the Rebbe's secretary wrote back to them a message from the Rebbe that said, the Rebbe answered that certainly the Eibishter, God did not make things happen to you that you should suffer or have anguish. Surely you have a shlichus, you have an opportunity and a mission to do there. Find it and you can do it. Rabbi Darren got the message, and while he was with his child in the hospital, he made sure to put on tefillin with all the doctors, meeting people and encouraging other patients that were there, and spend a lot of time in the hospital doing and meeting and helping people while they were there. What was the Rebbe telling them? What was the Rebbe saying? The Rebbe said, just because your shlichus changed locations or changed venues doesn't mean that your mission is not there anymore. The Rebbe was telling us that whenever, wherever, however, and whomever we are, it is the human and the divine that's coming together. And the question is how we go about it. There are many circumstances or causes that contribute to the detours in life that we have. But there's always and only one reason why that detour happened, is because it's God's plan and purpose for it to happen. And the reason why God put us in a certain place, in a certain time, in a certain way, is because he is waiting for us to live up to that moment. And when we realize this, then all the times, the transient moments that we have in life, the transitions going from one another, or these different types of things that were happening to us, the perspective helps us maximize, A, to utilize the time properly, and B, minimizes any stress and anxiety that comes with it. So what we can take away from what we studied today and what we've gone through, the different stories that we look at today, is number one, is to take a moment or situation in your life that wasn't planned and seemed that the details of your ambitions and dreams or plans. Ask yourself, how did you react? How might you have reacted differently if you would have focused and realized that this is all divine providence? And number two, taking those perspectives that we discussed today and applying it to our current situation in particular, what are the actions that we can take to change and make our current attitude and behavior based on the principles that we've taught? Hopefully this will help us go through this time. That will be a very short time, but realizing that this is only something transient. It's only there for us to be able to do something that God is waiting for us to fulfill, a mission to accomplish, a job we need to do that we couldn't do otherwise. Let us utilize this time appropriately, qualitatively, and see the divine blessing in everything we do. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or I can unmute everybody so you can say hello. I will unmute all. Here, all your mics are off, so unless you yourself are muted. So if you want to say something, more than welcome, or be careful what you say because your mics are off.
Thank you very much. It was most interesting, especially in this turmoil time.
Next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m., we will have the same subject, some more stories, and a different same angle of positivity bias. It was also on YouTube, so if you want to see it again or share it, so you can able to feel free to share the link. Any questions? Okay, we'll sign off. Great seeing you here. All the best. God bless you all.
Bye.
Bye.